Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing the Dark Souls franchise on the GeForce GTX 1060 3GB. For performance monitoring, I'll be using CAM, excepting on Dark Souls 1, since due to the mod I'm using, the overlay is not compatible. So the Dark Souls franchise, I'll be doing Dark Souls 1, 2 and 3. To skip out those particular games, check the timestamps down in the description. So first I'll be testing Dark Souls 1. This is not the remastered version, that one releases next month. I'll be testing that in a separate video, so stay tuned for that. First of all, this is a very bad PC board, but thankfully a modder called Durante made a mod called DSFix. If you want to download it, it's down in the description. And this basically allows us to go over 720p resolution, which previously was the maximum resolution. Also to unlock the frame rate and select more options, such as tweak the depth of field, the technique and quality of ambient occlusion, and anti-aliasing, which those options are completely missing from the game. So the game looks a lot better and we have more options to play with. So first I'll show you 4K, and I disabled ambient occlusion and anti-aliasing in order to maintain constant 60 frames per second. After that I just lowered to 1440p, 2560 by 1440, and I crank up everything to the max, including ambient occlusion and anti-aliasing, and that was more than enough to maintain 60 frames per second pretty much all the time, excepting on Blacktown, which is the worst performing part of Dark Souls 1. That's because the area is not properly optimized, it's loading stuff very far into the distance that is not necessary for it to load. So by looking to a side of the map you get constant 60 frames per second, and when you look to a certain place you get like half the frame rate sometimes, so you go from 60 to the low 40s, so that's something to keep in mind, but it's only that area so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Then I went into the forest area, which is one of the other ones that had some variable performance here and there, and on that one I used some pyromancy, since the fire effects also tank the frame rate a lot. It's like a 10 FPS hit when the fire is on screen, but once the effect disappears the frame rate goes back to normal, so I don't see it as a huge problem, but I don't know how to fix it, so I'll keep it like that. But yeah, right now that's how the game performs, and I'm going to talk to you again in the next game. Now I'm testing Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, and this is the second edition of the game. It's like a remastered version, for saying it some way, that gave us DirectX 11 support instead of DirectX 9 on PC, and also changed the placement of the enemies and improved the graphics a little bit. So yeah, that's what I'm testing here. And Dark Souls 2 runs much better than Dark Souls 1, at least on my end, so I just crank up the settings to the max, excepting camera motion blur, since that's the one that bothers me the most. I maintain the resolution at 4K, since that was enough to maintain 60 frames per second pretty much all the time. And I just did a couple of things. First of all, I went into a boss battles, since there are some effects on that place. There's a lot of fire, a lot of dust when the enemy just attacks, which is always good to stress the GPU. And still with all that, it was enough to maintain 60 with some drops into the mid 50s when there was a big attack going on. But other than that, the game maintained 60 frames per second all the time without a single problem. So I'll talk to you again in the next game. And finally, Dark Souls 3. On this one I'll be testing 3 resolutions. First of all, I'll be testing 1080p max settings, and that's enough to maintain 60 frames per second. I just lowered textures from the maximum to high in order to not run out of VRAM, because that can happen quite easily on this game. And it was pretty much at 60 frames per second with some stutters every now and then. It just seems to be the area I'm just running around at, which is Pharaoh Keep. Usually the stutters happen even if I'm not over the 3 gigs of VRAM limit. Then at 1440p I lowered the settings to a mix between medium and high in order to try and get 60 frames per second once again. And it's very manageable, but it has some drops into the low 50s sometimes, especially when there are a lot of effects on screen. For example, if you're fighting with a big monster like I'm doing in the video and there's a big splash of water or a magic attack or something like that. Not really a big deal if you ask me, but the stutters like on 1080p still happen. And finally at 4K, I used the same settings as 1440p, but I lowered textures to medium and my target was 30 frames per second. But unfortunately it drops below 30 when there is a lot of effects on screen, as mentioned a second ago, and we're still just hitting the 3 gigs of VRAM limit, which make the game stutter even more. I recommend lowering the settings further in order to maintain a more consistent frame rate, or just play at 1080p or 1440p. The game is much more stable that way. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you keep enjoying the video. Thanks for watching and see you next time.